My name is Aditi Modi, and I'm the Executive Director of the University of Chicago Center in India, and also the President of the U Chicago Alumni Association in the region. We hope first and foremost that everybody that is joining this evening are staying safe and healthy. And it is really heartwarming to see so many of you participating in a very topical webinar on emotional well-being and mental health. It's called Flourishing Under Fire. It is featuring my dear friend, Dr. Maureen Gaffney, and it has been brought to you this evening in collaboration with BW Business World, which is a fortnightly magazine launched more than 3 decades ago for many of you that might not be aware, and is among India's largest and most respected business magazines. Sipping Thoughts, a media platform which reaches over 2 million women on a monthly basis, and is started by Sukirti Gupta, who's also an alumni of the University of Chicago, and the U Chicago alumni, which provides connections with Chicago alumni, friends, and families. At a time of deep crisis, the notion of flourishing seems unimaginable to most of us. But as you will hear this evening from Maureen, she believes passionately that not only is it possible for us to flourish, but in an increasingly uncertain world, it is essential that we plan to do so. Maureen brings the latest research and thinking on emotional intelligence and resilience. She has designed and delivered a large number of programs on transformational leadership and change management, something I know we all are looking for guidance for. She's a very well-known psychologist, a writer, and a recognized Irish broadcaster, and has worked with a wide range of organizations and as well as major professional service companies globally and in the educational sector in Australia. Her book, Flourishing, which I hope many of you will read after today, sets out the scientific principles underlining being at your best. And it has been in the Irish non-fiction bestseller for straight 22 months. Maureen is a much sought after speaker, as you will come to understand after you hear her today. She has addressed business houses in Ireland, the UK, the US, Sweden, Germany, and Spain. She has worked in many other sectors of Irish life as director of the Doctoral Programme in Clinical Psychology at Trinity College Dublin, as Adjunct Professor of Psychology and Society in University College Dublin, Chair of the National Economic and Social Forum. She has also served on the Health Service Executive, on the Council of the Economic and Social Research Institute, and has been appointed for 2 terms as a Law Reform Commissioner. She earned a BA in Psychology from UCC, MA in Behavioral Science from the University of Chicago, and a PhD at Trinity College Dublin. She is a fellow member of the Harvard Kennedy School at Women's Leadership Board, and she has written extensively about how adversity can be a positive turning point in our lives. If we decide that our goal is not just to return to status quo, but actually to have better lives, something I know we all aspire to do in these unprecedented times. So now I will turn it over to Maureen for her to give her remarks to us.
Thank you so much, Aditi, and hello to everybody. Hello to everybody in India. I've never been, but that's number 1 on my bucket list when this horrible crisis ends. The big differentiator always between those who manage to cope with adversity and come out without being damaged, and those who are permanently affected by the setbacks and failures and crises that really are part of everyone's life, and now, of course, have been hugely magnified by the global crisis of COVID, has been resilience. And resilience, we used to think about it as adapting to change. But I came across a study which really inspired me. And it was a study of people who had pretty major setbacks and crises in their lives. And it showed that when we encounter a crisis, your functioning goes down. You're not able to function at the same level that you normally function. And some people, very, very, very few people, as it were, stay at that depressed level. The vast majority of people survive, but they never quite get back to where they were. They're permanently marked in some way. A very significant minority of people don't just, as it were, survive, but they keep going and they recover to where they were before. Their lives may be very different, but they're functioning at the same level. But what was really interesting to me is that another significant minority keep going. They don't just survive, they don't just recover, but they actually get to a level of functioning that they have never achieved before. And they're doing that not in spite of what happened to them, but because of what happened to them. And that really is the nature of the kind of flourishing that I'm talking about, is that you don't simply cope with what is going on around you, but that you use it in some way to achieve something, to be more than you ever were before. And it is that positive pivot that I want to talk about today, because I think it is at the absolute center of resilience. It is that moment in a crisis when you are suffering, when you're fearful, when you're full of uncertainty, when you can manage, as it were, to gather it all up and use it as a resource to become something, to do something that you would never have thought of doing before, that you never could have done before. That's the positive pivot. So what I want to do is do a little, in the time we have, a little deep dive on what is the nature of that positive pivot. And what it is that someone is able to summon up a particular positive emotion. In some cases, it's courage. In some cases, it's inspiration. In some cases, it's just grit. But whatever it is one of these positive emotions. And they are part of the economy of the brain, or if you like, the economy of the heart. Our emotions are not some accessory to our lives. In other words, we get on with our lives and we can park our emotions outside the door. We know now from 4 decades of neuroscience that our brain evolved to give emotions a preeminent role in human functioning. In other words, emotions are there to guide you in circumstances that are too important to be left to the cognitive part of the brain. Now, emotions and cognition, of course, are very tightly linked. So we are born with a basket of emotions. The first slide, if you can put it up there. And we have roughly about 10 basic positive emotions with all their variations, and roughly 10 basic negative emotions. The reason we are given emotions is not to make us happy, is not to torment us. The reason we're given emotions is to help us survive. Your brain has no interest in whether you're happy or not. Your brain is only interested in whether you survive. And negative emotions are there to alert you to threat. That is the only point of a negative emotion. It is there to alert you to threat. So your negative emotions really are your best friends. You couldn't survive without them. Think of any of you who are parents, the terrifying prospect of having a child who is unable to feel fear. Positive emotions are there to alert you to opportunity. And they work that way in the brain. So when you experience a negative emotion, it closes down everything. You focus absolutely like a laser on the threat that you see before you. This is fantastic when you are facing a life-threatening situation. It's not so good if you're in the middle of a modern way of living where you're tightly networked with a whole lot of people in your personal life and in your work life. It's like having an alarm in your house that goes off if a cat walks across the front garden. So that is the point of negative emotions. Each one of those, even a mean little emotion like envy that nobody really ever wants to acknowledge, it's there for a purpose. It is there to nudge you to up your game. You're envious of that person, then up your game. and see whether you can achieve the thing that you envy in that person, and so on. Positive emotions are there to alert you to opportunity. So every time you experience a positive emotion, it is alerting you to an opportunity which is going to help you not just to survive, but to flourish. So if you take something even like inspiration, well, that obviously is one that we can see intuitively inspires us. It gets us to do more, to achieve more, etc. But every single one of them have what's called an action tendency. The issue, though, is that they are not equal opportunity emotions. In other words, it's more important that you survive a threat than that you get an opportunity. If you don't survive a threat, you're not around for the next opportunity. So there's an asymmetry, an imbalance between negative and positive emotions. In other words, the negative has a much stronger, stickier impact than the equivalent positive emotion. So for example, if you, after this call, discover that you have won, I don't know how much in rupees, but a modest amount on a local lottery or something like that, it'll make you happy for how long? Maybe about 2 hours. It'll sort of give you a little lift. If you lose the equivalent amount of money, you will spend 2 days thinking about it, where you could have put it, what transaction in which you could have lost it, etc. So negative and positive are not equal opportunity emotions. Or bad is stronger than good. And that immediately raises the issue about what's the right ratio then between negative and positive emotions. And we know scientifically that the average human person going about their average day in a situation where there's no major crisis, the average ratio is about just under 3 positives to 1 negative. That's the average human condition in times when there isn't a major threat to you. And it's fine for those kind of times. But it is not enough in times of crisis. In times of crisis, you have to up the ratio to about 5 to 1 if you want to flourish. 3 to 1 will keep you out of trouble, but it won't actually help you to do everything that you could do. You've got to get it right up there to 5 to 1, 5 positives to 1 negative. So if you imagine that those 2 baskets of emotion, and you imagine the second slide, if you imagine that that they're each on a 4-point scale, you have to adopt what I call the 2-2 rule. In other words, in terms of negative emotions, you keep their intensity to 2 or below. In other words, it's okay to be indignant, which is a mild form of anger, to assert your rights and, as it were, to set boundaries. But above 2, it becomes rather dysfunctional and creates more trouble than it achieves good. Similarly, it's good to have a little bit of guilt. Guilt is there for a purpose. It's there to nudge us to take care of people around us, to be conscientious, to do what we're supposed to do. But you put guilt above 2, and you start having this sort of crippling guilt that in fact stops you. You spend a lot of time ruminating about the things that you're not doing, but you don't actually do them. Now, the opposite applies to positive emotions. In other words, you have to get them above 2 before they really register. Because remember what I said about the normal human condition is about just under 3 positives to 1 negative. So when you express a positive emotion at a very mild level, it really registers as almost neutral to the person receiving it. If you take maybe, at least in Ireland and the States and some of the countries I've talked to, maybe it's very different in India. But when women ask the men in their lives, do you love me? And he says, well, you know I love you. The reason that that doesn't land is because it really registers as neutral. In other words, if you want someone to know that you really love them, you've got to get it up to at least a 3. And similarly with other things like gratitude, appreciation, if you knock yourself out doing something at work, you pull out all the stops, you stay working late, you bring your report in the following morning to your boss, and your boss says, thank you. That doesn't register as a positive experience. It registers almost negative. So in other words, there's no neutral in human functioning. And mildly positive is the nearest we get to neutral. So when you don't, as it were, up the intensity and the frequency of positive emotions, you don't flourish, and the people that you interact with are not enabled to flourish. It's too neutral, an incubation, as it were, for what you want to make happen. So that economy of the heart is really the basis of resilience, that pivot, that ability to, as it were, have that store of emotions at a certain level of readiness or practice in your mind, so that when the big guns come out and you are under threat, that you can access that practice of positivity more easily. So that's really, as it were, the rules of the heart, or the economy of the heart. And one of the things I think that's important to know is that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with chaos theory, you know, the so-called flap of the butterfly's wings at one part of the globe can morph in a series of changes into a tornado at the other side of the world. Very small amounts of positivity in a cumulative way have a very big effect on your life. So you have to develop, as it were, what I call a sort of a snap strategy. You have to search for the positive. In other words, you don't get up in the morning if you want to get fit and say, I hope I get fit. Hoping you get fit is about as useless as hoping that you'll have a good day. In other words, it doesn't lend itself to any behavioral change or behavioral commitment. You have to have an active strategy to build the positive every day in every interaction, to build the positive for yourself, to search out the positive. That's the S. The N is that you notice the positive, that you actually don't go around mindless, but that you notice the small things that give you a little lift, the uppers, as it were, of the day. The A, S-N-A-P, the A is that you absorb the positivity when it happens. So when someone says, that was a great job, or I really love you, mother, or I really appreciate what you've done for me, that you let it, as it were, be absorbed. You don't just, as it were, shrug it off. And the final P, S-N-A-P, is the practice of positivity. And that happens in the small actions of the day. There's a very interesting piece of, very extensive piece of research done in Harvard about the uppers and downers of the normal day at work. And these are the very small things that happen, the expressions of gratitude, the acts of collegiality, etc. And of course, the equivalent negatives. And it's interesting that they found the same ratio as well. In other words, that all these little uppers in the day that happen in the workplace have a really significant impact on not just collegiality, productivity, but on innovation and creativity, which of course is going to be the biggest priority now, as we adapt the world of work, the world of everything, to the new reality that we live in. And those little uppers and downers have a hugely direct scientific effect on those macro, as it were, goals that every workplace, every family, every group of people who care about each other have. And what's interesting as well is that the little downers that happen at work, these small things that, as it were, just depress your mood, that tee you off in the day, nothing big, but these small downers have 5 times the impact of the equivalent uppers. In other words, bad is stronger than good. So one of the first things you have to do is do a negativity audit in your life. In other words, to see what kind of things that bring you down, that depress your mood, that affect your functioning, that interfere with your creativity. And if you can do anything to mitigate those things, spare no effort. So it's really important. I worked with a company once that had all their right technology, but this particular plant was not doing well. And as I did an audit of the little uppers and downers of the day, one of the interesting, the almost top rating downer was interruptions. Now, nobody had identified that in any of the interviews. It was almost unconscious, but as people began to document their day and, as it were, note the times, and if you do a mood diary, and note the times in the day when they weren't productive, they just weren't functioning right. What they found was that it correlated with an awful lot of interruptions. So small things like that, I think you audit out. And also you take back your own power. I'm a firm believer that you can't be driven crazy without your full cooperation. And I'll repeat that because it's worth really thinking about. You can't be driven crazy without your full cooperation. So if there is someone driving you crazy in your life, you've got to see how much power you can take back, because there's always a little bit of us that cooperates with that because of guilt, because of practice, because of habit, all scripts in our head, etc. But these are things that we can do. And every single time you have a little spark of positivity, no matter how minor, it has what's called an undoing effect. So for example, if you measure someone, if you observe someone and measure their physiological functioning while they're going through a painful medical procedure, the smallest act of positivity, like a nurse, for example, who puts her hand or his hand on yours, as an act of care, and you can see people's blood pressure coming down. So very small things can have that butterfly effect in your own life as well. Now, I'm trying to think, was there anything else that, yes, in terms of team working, and I think the same applies to personal relationships and also any kind of group living, is that one of the things we have to be attending to is what my new book will be about, which is coming out next year, which is that we have 3 innate biological, psychological drives that have to be met if we are going to flourish in life. We have a need for connectivity with people. 2 kinds. Most of us need an intimate relationship with one person, someone that we are very attached to. For most people, that's their parent. And in adult life, it's the person that they're married to or their intimate partner, someone that you can turn to and count on as a safe haven when you feel vulnerable. And then once you have that assured safe haven, then they're your secure base in life. That's why when your kids trust you, they often, parents say, like, am I playing any role in their lives, particularly in middle childhood where they seem to be getting on without you. But they're not at all. It's just that you are there as the secure base. And once they know that, they can get on with their lives and do everything they're supposed to do. And similarly, you can see what happens in divorce in adult life when that secure base is taken away from people. It disrupts their functioning for many, many months and sometimes longer. So you need that. And in connectivity, you also need your social group, your friends. We know from, for example, the example of the explorers, the Arctic explorers and the Antarctic explorers who were experiencing an extreme form of lockdown, as it were, that what kept them going was not just their own relationships, that they had with each other, but after about 9 months, even after the first 6 months, those relationships began to fray a bit because they were all locked in together. And any contact that they could have outside of that group became critically important to their survival. And I think that's already happening in lockdown. I know we had a much briefer lockdown here in Ireland, but there was a point, no matter how much you loved the people around you, where you couldn't wait, to get on the phone or a Zoom call with your friends to unload, the hassles of the day. And there are many, many hassles. You have an awful lot of people crowded in together who don't have their normal releases, an awful lot of people looking for snacks and meals and letting a big mess behind them, and women feeling very resentful about all this extra work, etc. So that's connectivity. The second major need that we have to flourish is the need for autonomy. And that's the one that has been absolutely compromised with this COVID crisis. We've really lost a huge amount of the normal autonomy that we enjoy. In other words, we're unable to live and organize our lives in the way that we always do. We don't have the freedoms to travel, to go out, to meet who we want, etc. And so we can't survive really well or flourish unless we really guard the autonomy we do have, the small amount of autonomy we do have. So that's very important, I think, when we're all crowded in together, that you're very, very sensitive to your own need for autonomy, because it's very easy when your need for connection isn't met. Someone is inattentive or unresponsive, you register immediately. The problem with autonomy is that your autonomy can be eaten into and undermined, and you don't know it for a while. You don't have quite and suddenly you just feel hemmed in. You feel that you want to burst out in some kind of way, and you don't want to be there, because in lockdown, people having outbursts isn't a good idea, because there's nowhere to go with it. You can't dissipate it. So I think it's very important that the nature of autonomy is that you're in charge, you're the agent of the direction and organization of your own life, and that you maximize whatever autonomy you do have, in terms of your schedule, in terms of time for yourself, in terms of boundaries. In other words, it isn't just the physical boundary of chasing your kids out so that they don't come in the middle of your Zoom call, but also carving out for yourself a time in the day that is just for you, even if you can't think what you want to do. Just that time alone to, as it were, ground yourself again in what's happening. Maybe just do the simplest kind of mindfulness. even 10 minutes of a break has this undoing effect and registers again where you are, what, as it were, you're choosing, what you can still choose to do. And the final need that we has been compromised during this time is the need for competence. The need to feel competent in your life is a basic psychological need. All of us have ways that we feel competent. For many of us, that's work is our primary arena for, as it were, enacting our competence. And a lot of us now are finding that very difficult, where we find ourselves incompetent with technology, or we can't do things the way we know. I mean, I talk to live audiences all the time. It's been quite a learning curve and I don't find it, I don't find it the same. You're always slightly agitated, I think, after Zoom calls because of the intense focus on faces and the fact that you can see your own face the whole time. We don't normally see our own faces the whole time. So there is that sort of uncertainty, in that sort of slight agitation that comes with it. And all of those things, the continuing uncertainty, which creates a sort of a free-floating anxiety, and then suddenly it will flare up. Most of the time we try to dampen it down, but it flares up occasionally. But that constant free-floating anxiety and uncertainty, I think, is having quite a depressing effect. So all the more reason you have to work much, much, much harder to build the positive. And that's not intuitive. When people are suffering, or people feel under crisis, their response is like, I haven't time to be thinking about the positive, this is a crisis. It's the very time you have to. It is the very time that you have to keep getting that ratio right. So I think that's the basics of what I have to say. And the rest of it, I think we can elucidate in questions and answers.
Maureen, thank you so much. We're going to continue to explore the theme of resilience, of survival, of flourishing in crisis through moderated discussion. A lot of our audience have actually sent in questions. We're continuing to gather more of these during this course. So I'm now going to invite Dr. Anurag Batra and Sukirti to lead the second part of our webinar. We're very grateful for their support and partnership in hosting the event today. And Dr. Anurag Batra is the Chairman and Editor-in-Chief at BW Business World, an exchange for media. He's among the leading influencers today in India and is continually contributing to not just the Indian media, but also the business landscape. He is a serial entrepreneur, a media mogul, a journalist, an angel investor, and most importantly, an internal optimist rolled into one. Sukirti, as I mentioned before, she's a co-founder for Sipping Thoughts, as well as an alumni of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She was the founder of MMI Online, which led Jagbrin New Media to become a big digital media company. And she also brings a wealth of international experience with her. So Sukirti and Anurag, over to you now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Modi, for involving Business World and me in this. I am an eternal optimist. The only thing I'm not optimistic about growing my hair, but most other things I am optimistic about. That's because I don't believe that, hair is such an important thing. But thank you, Dr. Maureen Gaffney, for such a qualitative and a quantitative framework for being resilient, for being successful in spite of all the distractions. I have two broad questions for you. I do understand the concept of resilience. I practice it in my life. I practice gratitude. I practice mindfulness. But let me tell you, most of the time, resilience has been forced upon someone. It is not a choice you make. Only over a period of time you practice. Like you were saying, if you have, you do it a little bit, you give points to it, you take it from 2 to 3, 3 to 4. So it was a beautiful way of saying, I was just thinking, when you were saying that, like my 12-year-old son, I tell him I love you, but now he doesn't say I love you back to me. 2 years back, he was used to. But he says, I love you back to my wife. So I think about it, all the time, right? Maybe small thing. And I know he loves me. There's no question. And, I'm not. But the way you explain that it is a neutral, when you say, of course, Papa. He said, Papa, of course I love you. It is so real what you were saying. Whatever you were saying, I was thinking about it. I just want to ask that in a normal day, we do not tend to think of the aspects of mindfulness, gratitude, resilience. We tend to think of them in ways of small responsibilities, tasks, or whatever objectives we set for each one of us. So how do you can in some way practice a daily resilience schedule? I'm not going to make it like a grand thing, but in everything we do, if it doesn't go to our plan, how do we make sure that we stay adaptive? I won't even use the word resilience because I think that's a later stage. So I just want to understand how can we practice it in a daily way?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the central question, isn't it? I once met a middle range manager in my work, and I had heard about him. I'd interviewed, maybe 100 people in the company, and his name came up virtually in every interview. So by the time I met him, I knew he was someone very special. And what people said about him was that he was the most positive person that they said things like, when I heard you speak, I thought of this person. And it turned out he was a very ordinary guy, very competent. He didn't have a university education, so he wasn't going to ever be into senior management, but he was very, very well thought of. And he was brilliant at developing other people. In fact, many of the senior people had passed through him, and they thought very highly of him. And I asked him, and he said, every situation I'm in, my attitude is, I want to make it better. I want to leave it better than when I found it, to leave it in a better state than when I found it. So his whole mindset was that every interaction was something that he had some control over, and he chose to exercise that control, not, as it were, to boost his own self-esteem, not to impress someone else. We all have our, as it were, unconscious purpose that we have as we go into any interaction. His was simple. I want to make it better. I want to make the interaction better. I want to make the situation better than the way I found it. And I was really, really impressed. And in fact, I used that in my work afterwards. When I was doing work on leadership, said to people, when you have an interaction with someone, don't just think about, as it were, the transaction. In other words, what is it you're trying to do? Are you trying to impart information or to your son or your daughter or anyone else in your life? Are you trying to impart information? Are you trying to, as it were, give them an instruction? Are you trying to give them guidance? Are you trying to correct them in some way? That's just the transaction. But what is your ultimate purpose? What's your positive purpose? And that's a very, very different question. If you ask yourself, what is my positive purpose when you go into an interaction like that, then I think you approach it very differently. So if you say, well, my positive purpose is that this person learns something really important and internalizes it and feels happy that they've learned it. Once you give your brain a purpose, your brain then alerts you to every single micro interaction where you can, as it were, use that. And it keeps you from getting distracted. In other words, it keeps you from arguing, or it keeps you from getting into a sort of a sidebar that you don't want to get into. So giving your brain loves a purpose. So once you give your brain a purpose, your brain, as it were, does the job for you. So I think you don't do it for every encounter, but I think that's the essence of mindfulness, actually, is that before every important encounter in your day, and of course that presupposes that you sit down and you mark your diary in terms of not just the time of something, but the importance of something, and that you give yourself 5 minutes before that interaction, if you can, or at least a few minutes, to think, what is my positive purpose here? Not just what I want to achieve, but what's my positive purpose? Then I think you get a better outcome. And for an awful lot of people, there's in fact, for all of us at all times, there's two things that we're transacting in an emotional way when we interact with people. One is we're measuring and monitoring how close this encounter is bringing us. In other words, do we understand each other better? Do we love each other more? Do we care about each other more? Or do we care about what the other person cares about more? That's one dimension. And the other is this interaction making me or the other person feel more respected? Now, they're quite different things. One is about care, one is about our closeness, one is about status. Because we're monitoring those two things all the time. So when you have an encounter where you go away feeling this person really cares and understands what it is I am trying to achieve, even if they can't give me what it is, but they understand it and they respect me. I felt respected. Then that is a great encounter. But it won't happen for some. If you are an extremely positive person and you practiced, etc., you're more likely to have those encounters. But for most of us, we have to, as it were, drill in that purpose in the morning in the same way as we mark in our diary that we have things to do. So they're the two things you want to achieve. You want to make someone feel understood, and you want to make someone feel respected, irrespective of whether you're going to comply with what they want or not.
Sure. I respect what you're saying, and I get what you're saying. And, I'm a very positive person. I'm myself that certificate, but I know I'm very resilient. I follow a lot of things you said very subconsciously. So you only made me think more and more about things. So some of the things we do it subconsciously, they become part of our personality. And some things like curbing, sometimes when the negative emotion comes, curbing that takes a little practice, it takes a little bit effort. Sometimes you make small things which are really not that big, very big, and then waste a lot of time ruining about it. And eventually in 2-3 days time, it doesn't matter. It will be realized. So I think what I am taking away from your conversation is, make a daily practice of making sure that you give other people more respect, and you give them a hearing, and
Yes.
that itself will make them a little more optimistic. So I'll get Sukriti to, and there are lots of audience questions.
There are tons
I
of
don't want to stay between you and the other questions, but it's been a fascinating session. I was taking notes. I write digitally, so thank you so much. And I have not been able to read your book, but I hopefully will see you soon. Your bucket list item number 1 of visiting India, I hope happens soon. And
Yes.
we will partner with UChicago and Sipping Thoughts to host you.
That would be great.
And I'm sure it will happen. I have no doubt that it will happen. That's a bucket list item. It'll happen over the next 12 months, maybe 6 months. So all the best.
No, I'm optimistic. I think I have a friend who works in AstraZeneca, and she's involved in the Oxford project, and she's not someone who is, normally, she's very considered, but she's really optimistic that so we'll pray for that.
Thank you. Sukriti, your
Yeah, Maureen, I do have a question because I think you said this startling fact, 5 positives to 1 negative, especially in this time of COVID. And that's tough for a lot of people because some people maybe are naturally feeling that, okay, but 5 positives to 1 negative, even in my mind, seems like how do I muster up or how do I look for all of those small, small things and kind of keep into this balance? Any tips for that?
Well, I think positivity is around us all the time. So I go back to that SNAP strategy, SNAP. You have to search for it. And often you have to scrape the barrel. I was once part of a women's group. We were all professional women from different areas of life, and we got together once a month. And we had the wisdom, or someone had the wisdom, to say that before we got into whatever was bugging us, because it was a support group, if you had problems at work or trying to work out issues. But before we launched into that, we did a tour de table where you had to say, tell me one good thing that happened in your life since the last meeting. And like I say, there would be months where you'd scrape the barrel. You would think, my God, it was a terrible month. I can't think of anything. But the more you search, you will find something. You always will. And even the days when you can't find anything, because there were days I turned up and I couldn't think of anything much. But if I listened to other people, it reminded me, oh, well, that happened in my life, but I'd forgotten about it. Now, that's the issue, is that because your brain is, because bad is stronger than good, your brain is highly attentive to anything negative that happens. Even if you try to repress it at nighttime, you have a worry, about something, and then you repress it and you get on with your day, and then you go to bed, you put your head in the pillow, bang, it comes back, So the negative is sticky, very, very sticky. It's like Velcro. And the positive is like Teflon. Something good happens, you think, oh, great, and then that's it. Now you have to reverse engineer your brain. you have to, as it were, really make yourself notice the positive. So even when you get up in the morning, to look out your window and see, is there any glimpse of nature? Like, even if it's only the sky above the skyscrapers. But we know, for example, that even having a pot plant on your breakfast table or on the hall on the way out to work, to just look at that. These are very small things, but these are the very small things that cumulatively make up your day. And then you've got to do the other bit of reducing the impact of the negative. And I have a sort of a three-pronged strategy that I use for that, about worries in particular, which can come back and affect you for hours, afterwards, ruminating. And women are very prone to ruminating. Men are better at, as it were, shutting things out, by and large. But women ruminate, particularly anything has to do with their relationships, either at work or at home, etc. And I think you either, if there's something you can do about it, anything you can do, that will address that worry, no matter how small, even if it's only writing it down on a piece of paper and committing to coming back to it tomorrow. But any action that you can take, I think, is a good thing. And then you have to mentally, as it were, file it away after that. Now, it takes practice, but that's one thing. If you can't act on something, then, and it's something that you have no control over, and that includes worrying about COVID, you really have to bin it. You have to, as it were, mentally take that worry as if it's written, crumple it in a ball and put it in the bin, preferably a bin with a cover. Now, even these very small actions can have as a parallel effect on your brain in the same way as if you're watching a football match, you know, the way people can leap out of their chair, you know, because as you're watching and attending to something, your brain is actually activating the same muscles as the football player is using. That's why people do things like leap out of chairs. So it also works the reverse way, that if you do something physical, like write your worry down, scrunch it up, put it in a bin, etc., then, or in the garbage, then, you know, it's an act. So that's a critical thing. Or the other is you file it away formally. In other words, you say, this is something I can't do anything about now, but I'm not forgetting about you. So you have to assure your worry, like a child, that I am not forgetting about you. I'm putting you to bed now, but I will be back to you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So that, and have some time when you will come back and have a worry session. Now, once you schedule a worry session, it's interesting how it goes into perspective, because you sit down and you think, okay, I'm going to devote 15 minutes now to doing proper worry. Now, once you do that, of course, you've taken control of it, and it's not the same, as it were, this niggling external thing that is affecting your well-being.
So we'll take the first audience Q&A. Divya, please go ahead.
So I had a question, Maureen, that in today's times, you know, I feel we have this overhang of the pandemic in terms of the anxiety or fear that kind of stays with us as we go through this new normal. And it gets a lot more challenging as we're interacting with different people. We're living in a society where we may be interacting with family members who have different levels of precautions, going out. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with this overhang of constant anxiety and fear while we're trying to, you know, perform to our best in our daily lives?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's this free-floating anxiety, you know. You think you're okay, but you're not okay. It's sort of, I was describing it recently as a zombie reality. You know, in other words, the zombie looks like it's alive, but it's not, you know. It looks like normal life, but it's not. And it's almost been more difficult here in Ireland since the lockdown was lifted, you know, and particularly now in the summer, and, you know, things are not quite back to normal, but they look back to normal, but they're not, you know. And how you know is there's this funny air, you know, you're going in to do your shopping, and then someone comes too near and you get this spark of anxiety. I know that parents are worrying a lot about young people. Most of we've pretty much suppressed the virus here, but there's little sort of outbursts, very small numbers. But it's all amongst young people now who are, who blames them? I mean, in a way, they've been cooped up with their parents. I mean, every teenager's nightmare, you know, away from their friends and cooped up with their parents at home, and under scrutiny, you know. So when they do get together, it's going to be inevitable that, you know, they're careless, and that's the burden of parenting. I know that, I mean, thankfully, it didn't happen when our kids were that age, but I know that, you know, that we worried about other things. You know, you worry about everything about your kids when they're teenagers because you lose so much control. We adopted a sort of, I figured you could only enforce 3 rules ever, you know, and I've forgotten I've forgotten one of them, but I know one rule was, always tell us where you're going. Even if you go somewhere that you weren't supposed to go, you know, always tell us. You know, we will not punish you. We will not, you know. If ever you're stuck, if ever you feel that you need to get a lift home, even if you're somewhere that you shouldn't be, even if it's later than we said We won't give out to you, you know, we'll come and collect you. And I figured if they complied with those, there was another one, but I've forgotten what it was. If they was complied with those three, they were the ones that we hammered home so often, and we gave them a lot of leeway about other stuff, like about tidying up. You know, I simply shut the door, and every so often the housekeeper would go in, and there'd be sort of a whole scale clean up. But I didn't nag them about things like that. I didn't nag them about helping in the house. I kept all my nagging for the really important things. And I think that's what you have to do now. You have to figure out what are the maximum three things. You know, if you can reduce it to two, even better, that they know you will go ballistic if they, you know, if they go against those, you know, but that you then give them a bit of leeway with the other stuff, you know, then usually they get the message, you know. Kids are very smart and cunning, you know. They know what they'll get away with, and they know what they won't, you know.
Great. Thank you for that. I'll take the next question from Payal.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Sukriti, for this. And Maureen, was lovely listening to you this evening. So my question goes to the things that you're talking about, the positive and the negative threats. See, there's something I think we all, when we are in a student life, it's all about the peer pressure in terms of education. But right now, as entrepreneurs, and during this, especially this tough time, we are going through, it's a kind of a peer pressure, but in terms of our business circles. And this one word, envy, that you use there, which is a threat to negativity, it's really very difficult, you know. So we try to wear a different, so we camouflage ourselves and saying that, oh, I don't have any envy in my mind. And it's very difficult to accept it on a platform. But then there is some bit of envy in everybody of us. You know, what happens is, for example, if my friend is doing very good in this tough time, then I'm unable to do anything. There is a fear within me, which kind of turns into an envy. But I really don't know, because that's the only thing. Apart from that, like, from an undergraduate to being an entrepreneur for 22 years now, I've come a long way because of my resilience, I would say. And from a small town which doesn't even have electricity today, it's Mangpur near Darjeeling, from there to Gurgaon, it has been a beautiful journey. But then this feeling of envy is the only thing which takes me to negativity. So how do I overcome that?
Well, I think what I said earlier, you know, is that a little bit of envy is a good thing. You know, if they're doing very well, work a bit harder. You know, it sort of keeps you on your toes. It's when it becomes destructive is when you start focusing on the other person rather than on your work. That's when your focus goes off your work. If envy has the effect of, you should say, okay, someone seems to be doing very well. Okay, then I am now going to stop wasting my time looking at them, and I am going to focus absolutely on my work. So you have to remind yourself of that, because it's sort of a distractor. The second thing about envy is I had a great friend at the University of Chicago when I was a student there, and he had a great strategy for dealing with envy. He said you have to take the full package. In other words, if you envy someone's achievement or the way they look, or, you know, whatever it is you envy about them, you have to take the full package. You have to take their personality. You have to take their family. You have to take the way they look. You have to take the way they live their lives. And of course, once you think about that, you think, I don't want that. I just want this bit, you know. So I think that's, I always found that it makes me laugh, you know, and also a certain amount of self-forgiveness. You know, Gore Vidal said that every time a friend succeeded, he died a little. I thought that, you know, so it goes back actually to one of the positive emotions that gets very little attention, which is humor. And the reason that humor qualifies as a very basic positive emotion is not just because, you know, it makes you feel better, but it actually has a very definite effect on interfering with the build-up of negativity. In other words, humor is an emotional competence. So, for example, if you're on a team and there's someone who has a great sense of humor, this isn't just an accessory that's, same thing as having brown eyes or black hair. Humor is an emotional competency. And when they have the smarts to say something funny that makes us all laugh, it has the effect of dampening down and undoing that, as it were, a spiral of negativity that may be developing. And the other thing about humor is that it bonds people together. If you laugh with people, you feel closer to them. So that, as it were, belly laugh that you have, when you meet your friends or you're in a group, etc., it bonds you with other people. And if you look at, I often think that Ireland, actually, the single biggest thing, that got us from having a bailout in 2008, the whole economy fell apart. And we were a complete basket case. And now we were before COVID the top performing economy. One is that the Irish are very pragmatic, but the other is, I think, humor got us through it single-handedly. That people just joked about the whole thing. I mean, there's loads of jokes going around all the time. I don't know whether it's the same in India or not about COVID, but it puts things in perspective, because the terrible thing about negativity is that you lose perspective. You think it's the end of the world, and it's really important, that you sit back and think, this too will pass, and it will.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you. Really
we'll take the last question from Shiv Kumar. Shiv Kumar, please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I am S.K. Singh from Jivaj University, Gwalior. My question for Dr. Maureen is, do positive emotions make a person learn more or negative emotions?
Do positive emotions help you learn better than negative emotions?
Yes.
Yes, they do. And it works through, particularly through, the obvious one is encouragement, that when someone, the learning is about unfolding. It is not about drumming something into someone. It is about the unfolding of their natural intelligence. It's the unfolding of their natural curiosity and interest. If you look at the way children learn, they are intrinsically interested in learning. Nobody has to teach a child, as it were, how to be interested. All you have to do is provide the right environment. And the environment that seems to, apart from encouragement, the environment that seems to, not seems to, but which is demonstrated empirically to be associated with the highest level learning, the most retention of important concepts, the highest conceptual understanding of things, the longest, and the ability to apply what you've learned to multiple situations, is learning that respects someone's autonomy. There, again, in my book, when it comes out next year, there's a whole lot of stuff about learning, and the same in adult life, is that when you trust people, as it were, to approach something from their own intrinsic interest, and when you give them everything, so in other words, you are enabling someone to do what they want to do anyway, then you get fantastic creativity. There's multiple studies on that. And the same with innovation and artists, art and creativity. For example, there's a very classic, one of the very first studies that was ever done was of children who like to draw. And these children were then divided into 3 groups. One were promised a prize if they did a very good drawing. The others were just told draw, and one, they produced the drawings and then they were given a prize. The children who were promised a prize did the worst drawings, and in fact lost interest in the drawings afterwards. Because once you're working towards someone else's reward, someone is giving you a reward, you're giving away your control. The thing isn't happening in you anymore. It is being controlled by the outcome, and you're being controlled by the outcome. In other words, you're doing something now for the reward. And there's been 40 years of research which shows that when you start interfering with people by incentivizing them, that it has a very depressing effect on the quality of performance and particularly on innovation. So for people who are starting their own businesses, entrepreneurs, etc., and for anyone now, because we're all under pressure to innovate now, the more they feel controlled by things outside themselves, the worse the performance.
Wow, Maureen, that was really, really enlightening. I think there's so many takeaways from this session. I don't even know. I think focusing on the positive, that first of all, we spent a very interesting 1 hour. I think one thing that I will not forget, which you have really ingrained in my head, that you can't be driven without your full cooperation.
Can't be driven crazy without your full cooperation.
It actually makes you understand a lot better how much things are actually within our control. And maybe really looking for those positive events, looking at how we can actually analyze our day and say, you know what, this was good. I think a lot of times we just kind of say, like you said, maybe just give it a 3 when it could be possibly a 5. Could be much, much better. So gratitude to you for an excellent session, Maureen. Thank you very, very much for giving us your time and being with us. And I know a lot of our attendees are also saying, oh my goodness, thank you. It was very insightful, amazing learning, interesting session, excellent session. These are all the words that are coming in. So I can't thank
5 to 1, 5 to 1. I love that.
a lot of thank you.
It was a privilege. It was a privilege.
So I would like to
on my way to India.
Yes, we're so excited to have you here to host you. I'd like to also thank you on behalf of Business World and of course the University of Chicago. I also want to thank the University of Chicago alumni staff and also all the alums that have joined us. And thank you also because you are the alum of the University of Chicago.
Absolutely.
So glad to have been here with you. And with that, we will sign off for tonight and we're hoping to see you very soon in India.
Thank you so much.